Hey guys, Jared, Transformational Coaching, Action is Transformation. In this video, we're going to get into chemistry and compatibility. What is chemistry, what is compatibility, and how it plays out in the relationship, and why knowing these two concepts are really important to understand what are the most effective ways to have a relationship. The chemistry and compatibility model I've used from Mark Manson. Mark Manson has some really great work on this, and he outlines 4 different types of relationship that can happen when it comes to chemistry and compatibility. So let's get into it. Now, first off, before we get into the 4 types of relationship, it's really important to understand what chemistry is and what compatibility is, and how the two work in a relationship. First off, chemistry is that warmth, that sensation, that feeling, that juiciness, or the lack of juiciness that you get in a relationship. For instance, I remember relationships in my own life where I was connected with someone and I felt really, really passionate. It was like a volcano. I felt the energy flowing through me and I was like, oh my gosh, this person feels really great. They're awesome. I love this aspect about them. I love that aspect about them. Everything feels really, really good. And then suddenly everything crashed and it didn't work. And the reason why it didn't work was because I didn't have compatibility. Now, what's compatibility? Compatibility is your ability to connect with another human being on shared value systems. So for instance, 2 individuals might have a lot of chemistry where they love each other, they feel a lot of passion, their hearts both open up to each other, but then they might not have compatibility. And so a good example of this would be, I had 2 clients, they were both professors, they had a lot of chemistry, they loved each other's minds, but then when they got in the relationship, they were always fighting because they both wanted to be right. They both thought they were super intellectual, smarter than the other person, even when it came to the relationship. And so they had a high amount of chemistry. They liked each other, like, wow, I love you, you have a brilliant mind, you're really intelligent, and you're smart. However, at the same time, they had no compatibility whatsoever because they weren't willing to put aside their own desires to be more intellectually superior. They were more in love with their intellect than they were with the other person. And that's one of the points that I've talked about in relationships, that it's really important when it comes to having an authentic, deep, and loving relationship to recognize that if you want to have that type of relationship, you have to be able to see that person outside of your own wants, needs, and desires. If you can't see a human being outside of your own wants, needs, and desires, and you're only seeing them through that filter or through that lens or those glasses, then there's actually not unconditional love there. It's very conditional. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're aware of it and as long as the other person is aware of it. And whether they're aware of it at a conscious level or not, people always have a sense of whether they're being loved or connected with unconditionally. Most people who are aware. So let's get back to compatibility. What does compatibility mean, and what variables or what items do we need to be aware of when it comes to compatibility? Well, first off, compatibility, there can be mental compatibility, so we might like each other's thoughts, we might like each other's worldview. There can be social compatibility where we might like doing the same things. We might both like going snowboarding or rollerblading. Those are things that I love to do, FYI. Or it might be something more of emotional compatibility. It's like we have a similar emotional intelligence. Now, what I've found is that usually complementary qualities don't stick, and usually it's these opposite qualities that stick. So someone who's really, really energetic and excited might attract someone who's more of an even keel because they feel grounded. On the flip side of that, some people who are, maybe really, really just not that excited or just really introvert, they might attract an extrovert because there's that yin and yang dynamic that's going on. Relationships tend to be our greatest teachers in life because we don't teach emotional intelligence in schools yet. Some are starting to. I had a great conversation with a friend the other day and previous client who did inform me that They are starting to teach it in some schools, which was really exciting. But the point that I'm making here with the compatibility is usually it happens with people who have opposite qualities to us, and that's so they can teach us something that we're missing or lacking in our life. I can remember some of my previous relationships. They taught me to be more open and more loving to all the different flavors of life. Others taught me to be more decisive. Others taught me to be more selective about who I let into my life. And relationships tend to be really great teachers, and we usually attract someone of opposite quality of us until we become more whole within ourselves. And that's a great part about it, is once you become more whole and complete in yourself, more well-rounded and developed emotionally, intellectually, financially, once you have that life mastery down, then you'll see that you'll start to attract other people in your life who are at that same level, and you can create a really beautiful relationship if you want to. For me, I don't really necessarily desire another relationship because I really enjoy my life, I really enjoy my work, I really enjoy what I do. And so why would I ever need to really change anything? Does that make sense? Beautiful. So let's get into now the 4 types of relationship that you can have when it comes to this chemistry compatibility model. The first type of relationship is the low chemistry, low compatibility, and that usually doesn't happen too much. And here's the reason. Low chemistry, low compatibility, it doesn't happen that much just because there's no chemistry and there's no compatibility. Those are those abusive relationships that even in abusive relationships, you can have a high amount of chemistry but not a lot of compatibility. But usually those relationships in that low compatibility, low chemistry stage doesn't really go anywhere. The second type of relationship is low compatibility but high chemistry. Now these are great relationships that feel really satisfying. People are really excited about it. However, what happens in these types of relationships is they implode. Just as quickly as they explode, they also implode. I know I've had this experience multiple times. Now I'm very aware when when I'm having that really cataclysmic reaction. That's what chemistry is. It can be cataclysmic. It can be cataclysmic in the sense that a chemical reaction, chemistry, what happens in chemical reactions? They either fizz up and blow over and then they eventually neutralize, or they fizz out. So I'm thinking of like 10th grade chemistry class right now. There's some reactions where everything just explodes and it feels real good and there's a lot of chemistry, and then there's other times where it just falls flat and there's none of that juice that's there. So we want that juice, and that's great, but when you have the relationship where there's high chemistry and no compatibility, you have to be wary, because not worried, just wary means keeping a keen eye, because what will happen is suddenly those compatibility features will come to the forefront, and you'll think, wait, what's the matter with this person? What's the matter with this situation? I was suddenly really excited about this relationship, and now I'm looking at this other individual and I'm seeing that they're not the type of person who I thought they were. And then we start blaming our partner. We start projecting all of that onto our partner. So it's really important to recognize that the high chemistry, low compatibility relationship can be very, very destructive and fatal. It nearly ended my life a couple of times. And when I say ended my life, I felt like I had to restart life a couple of times. That's all. Does that make sense? So it's really important to see when we have that explosive chemistry, and make sure, because your heart might get carried away with it, make sure that there's that high compatibility there as well too. With compatibility, I've noticed that there's more security and more stability in the relationship, and we'll get into that after this second description. So with chemistry, we want to be really aware of, okay, this might be a little bit explosive. Is this person really compatible? Remember, love isn't enough. And I mean that in the nicest loving way possible. Love isn't enough. We may have been told love is enough, or all you need is love, all these great romantic stories, but it's not true. There's other qualities that we need. I've had great love for individuals in my life, and I realized that I couldn't be with them because our compatibility or our value systems were different. That's really what compatibility is. It's about shared value systems. I want to grow at the same pace as you. I have the same similar value systems to you, and that's what allows us to have more stability in the relationship. I've found a lot of times in my own relationships where I had high chemistry and everything felt really good, and then that person they weren't compatible with who I was, with my value systems, what I was about, what I wanted to do with my life. And so the relationship, as quickly as it exploded, it imploded as well. And that was really devastating. I felt like I had to restart my life a couple times. So just be aware if you're in a high chemistry relationship and then all of a sudden that other person seems to not have that you seem to not have that chemistry, that really amazing reaction with them anymore. Don't blame them. Ask yourself, were we ever compatible to begin with? A lot of the times when we get out of those dopamine and those oxytocin hits that usually happen in the beginning of a relationship. Oxytocin is the chemical that's responsible for love and trust and feeling good, and dopamine obviously is responsible for us feeling really good. It's what's in cocaine and other drugs that release that brighten up our dopamine receptors. Once we come down from those dopamine and receptor hits, we suddenly start to see that person for who they are and how they can actually be compatible or not with us. And it's really important to find that balance. Let's get into number 3. High compatibility, low chemistry. This is a relationship that I think is really important to be aware of, because you don't want to get caught up in a passionless marriage. You don't want to get caught up in a passionless way of being. The high chemistry, no compatibility, that's you're doomed to destruction and chaos and fighting. But high compatibility, low passion, there might be more security there and there might be more stability there. However, if that's what your relationship is marked by, you might find yourself not being nearly as happy or nearly as enjoyable as you could be in a relationship. You might have security, you might have stability, and that might feel great, but there's not going to be that zest and passion there. And this really comes down to value systems. Maybe you value security and safety more than you do passion and invigoration and vibration in a relationship. And if so, that's perfectly okay, as long as you're aware of that and know that and are in agreement with yourself that that's okay. That's one of the things that I had to recognize about myself. There's things about me where I was like, well, I don't know how I feel about this, but you know what? I'm at least in agreement with myself that for right now, until my intuition speaks to me or until I get some deeper realization, I'm going to go for it in this way, and I'm going to feel confident about going for it in this way. That's what commitment is. And so if you're in a relationship where there's a high degree of compatibility but not that passion, that's okay if you like safety and security. It's important to know that about yourself. Cool, I just value safety and security more than I do passion. And if that's it, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Own that fully. But if you start to feel a sense of lack of passion no longer driving you and exciting you, well, then you might need to reevaluate the relationship, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Beautiful. Let's get into the 4th type now. The 4th type is obviously the best. High compatibility, high amount of chemistry. I still have yet to find this. I'm sure it's out there. I'm not looking for it. I'm excited where I'm at. If it comes in, great. If it doesn't, great. I'm fine either way. Now, this relationship is so satisfying, and I can only imagine, I can't speak from personal experience about this, because there's a high amount of energy, there's that juice, that zest, that passion. The sex is probably really great and powerful. It probably feels really, really good. But then there's also that sense of, wow, I can actually see deeply into this person. They can see deeply into me. We have shared value systems, and can we grow together? And it's really important to ask yourself that question. Yes, we might have a deep sense of connection, but can we actually grow together as human beings? You might have high degree compatibility. You might have a high degree of chemistry. Now, do your value systems match up? And that's really what compatibility is about. It's important to ask ourselves and the other person those questions. Hey, I just want you to know that I'm the type of individual who I start something and then maybe after 3 months I give up or quit on it because I'm no longer excited about it. If you have a person who's really all about execution and finishing and completion, well, then you might not fit well as a business partner to someone who's just flimsy and says, well, we can throw this project out the doors as well. No, if you're valuing execution and your partner just values, staying in their own flow and wanting to do whatever it is that they want to do, well, that's going to be a hard business partnership, and it's important to be aware of that. Some people value success, like a completion and accomplishment, while others just value feeling good and not necessarily completing or finishing something. So it's important to be aware of these value systems that you have and bring them into the relationship before you get into something that's long-term and seriously committed. The last thing that you want to do is make a commitment to a person, give another person your word, only to find out that you're not compatible. Now, you can always renegotiate the terms of the relationship. We're always willing, we can always go into that space, but it's important to put that up right up in the front. We have this in marriage, they say till death do us part, but that old structure really is outdated. Marriage was a certain structure that was used for society and for survival. It's used for society in terms of when people are in marriages, you get taxes, you get you have to pay less in taxes. You get benefits from the government, but it's for society, so society can continue on. You have relationships, you grow a family and a home, and they carry on society and they carry on the way of life. But now we're getting into a time where we're recognizing there's so many different ways to live and have relationship. You can make and define relationship however you choose. It's totally, completely, 100% up to you. You can choose however you want to have relationship. Does that make sense? So you don't have to have it. It doesn't have to be till death do us part. It can be a life partner. It can be, hey, I really love and care for you right now, but if we ever get to a point in our relationship where I don't love you, or I feel like you're holding me back, or you feel like you're holding me back, let's call it quits, because I'd rather have us continue to love each other, even letting each other go, instead of committing to something that we both no longer want to be a part of and then slowly growing resentful towards one another, which is what I see happen a lot of the times. So we want to be aware of how we want to have the relationship. We want to be aware of the power that we have to create the relationship that we want. As divine spiritual beings living in a temporary human body, it's really important to recognize that however we want to create our life, we're welcome to do so. There's no rules. There's no rule books. There's no guidebooks. Now, there are laws. It's important to look at laws and be aware of laws and, suffer the consequences or take in the consequences of breaking laws. But ultimately, you're allowed to do whatever you want. You're allowed to set it up however you want. But it doesn't mean that there's not consequences. I can remember the first time I got in a relationship, a real serious relationship, where I thought I was going to marry this individual, and then I had the realization that she was more in love with the idea of us as a couple, and she was more in love with the idea of us being together than us actually being together. And that was a really hard truth for me to recognize. And I just moved in with her. I just moved across the state, spent a lot of money, and I realized in that moment, wow, this is really hard. I really love this person. I saw myself being with them for the rest of my life. And now I'm just seeing I was more in love with the idea of them when the idea of the relationship, well, she was. And I think there was a part of me that might have been in love with that idea as well too. And once I saw that, it really scared me. But I knew that I had to call off the relationship because it would have gone to a bad place. And so that was what I did, and that was really hard. So be aware that there's always going to be consequences to the decisions that you make, and that they won't always be easy. However, if you stay aligned to that deeper knowing and that deeper truth, you're going to find yourself going in the right direction. And it may be hurtful. It may hurt the other person. It may hurt you. However, you'll be aligned to yourself and you'll be in integrity, and that feels really, really good. Not always at first, but in the long run, I promise it always feels much better. That's all I got for this time. Thank you for joining me, you guys. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free. Also, please subscribe and share with any family members or friends who you think would get a lot of value out of this. If you'd like to, I'm running a free Sacred Relationship series. Check out the link in the bio there. The Sacred Relationship series is it's a really powerful series all about relationships and the goods, the bad, the ugly, the awesome, the confusing. We're interviewing live coaches. We're interviewing relationship coaches, industry experts. That's all I have for this time. I'll catch you next time. Have a great week.